The mind is a museum of the past because it keeps curating yesterday like it's still worth displaying. Every memory becomes an exhibit. Every belief is a dusty or an artifact. Every fear is a plaque explaining who I used to be. The mind loves preservation, not liberation. It ropes off old stories with velvet lines and calls them truth. It hangs outdated identities on the wall and insists I keep turning them. I'm not here to admire relics. I'm here to walk out of the museum and back into living and breathing my desired lifestyle now. Why the mind is as a museum is a the mind is a museum metaphor liberates you from you. It exposes the mind and its as archives, never as truth. When you see the mind as a museum, you stop mistaking its exhibits for reality. Thoughts become artifacts, never instructions. Memories become displays, never dynasty. The moment you recognize the mind is showing you old exhibits, you stop obeying them. I'm good at obeying old exhibits, but I am awakening and aware of what's occurring now so I can avow and open up adventurous visionary omnificence. It separates the perceptor from the performer. And that's something I discovered today is if you stop being a student of your life and start being the perceptor or the student of now, your life opens up. The museum metaphor reveals that you're walking through the halls is never the you hanging on the walls. You become the perceptor, never the character in the exhibit. That separation is liberation, awareness, stepping out of identity. It frees you from inherited scripts. Once you see beliefs, viewpoints, wounds, and survival patterns as museum pieces, you stop carrying them as sovereign exhibits. They lose authority. They lose gravity. You walk out of the museum into the now, unburdened, unborrowed, and unrepeatable. That sounds kind of interesting. Unborrowed, unrepeatable, unburdened. Feels kind of liberating. I don't know, it feels real liberating. Why education is a museum of the past. Education preserves yesterday, and doctrine in education doesn't teach perception. It teaches preservation. It displays old theories, old frameworks, and old conclusions, like the fallacies and artifacts behind the glass. Students never meet life, they tour the past. How are we, you think we're meeting something, we're moving, but we're really touring the past? Have you ever witnessed that in your life? I have. Education curates memory, never awareness. Thinking and knowing are museum guides walking you through what others once believed. Nothing new is allowed in the mind because a storage room of inherited exhibits instead of living instruments of clarity. Education trains repetition, never liberation. It rewards you for reciting archived knowledge, never perceiving what's actually free and here, liberating you from you. It conditions you to perform the past instead of creating the present. The museum gets bigger, you get smaller, while the memory is a museum of the past. Memory preserves what no longer that's what's no longer alive. Memory doesn't show you reality, it shows you exhibits of what used to be. It freezes moments, labels them as meaning, and displays them as if they're still true. You end up walking through yesterday instead of being chauffeured of the now. Memory curates identity from old artifacts. The mind builds your identity from archived stories, inherited interpretations, and outdated conclusions. It arranges them like relics behind glasses and calls it the collection. Me. Even though none of it is current, memory repeats what it can never release. What memory stores, it replays. What memory stores, it replays. That awakened me today when I introduced myself to that. What it replays, it reinforces, and what it reinforces becomes a loop you mistake for authenticity. Memory doesn't liberate, it recycles. It keeps you touring the same halls, admiring the same ghosts. Why heal is a museum of the past. Healing preserves old wounds. Most healing work keeps returning to the same injuries, the same stories, the same emotional fossils. It treats the past as a permanent exhibit space. Instead of dissolving the womb, it keeps restoring and re-examining it like a curator, polishing an artifact. Healing recycles identity. Healing often reinforces the same one who was hurt. Healing often reinforces the same one who was hurt identity. It frames you as a character shaped by yesterday's pain. The process becomes a guided tour through your own history, keeping you loyal to the version of you that no longer exists. Healing repeats what it studies. Whatever you focus on, you feed. Healing that obsesses over the past keeps the past alive. By studying the wound, you sustain the wound. The museum stays open because you keep visiting the same exhibits. Why the thinking, knowing mind is a museum of the past. My thinking, knowing mind is a museum of my past because it only displays what it already collected. Every thought is an old exhibit. Every belief is a framed relic. Every conclusion a plaque of explaining who I used to be. The mind doesn't create the new, it curates the familiar. It loops yesterday's interpretations, labels them as truth, and walks me through the dusty halls as if they're still relevant. Thinking, knowing never shows me life. They show me memory. And the moment I rely on them, I stop living the moment I'm in and start touring the past. I've already outgrown the past. I've already expanded out of and rose out of. Why punctuated writings mirror the museum from the past. Punctuation freezes expression. Every period is a glass case, every comma a velvet rope. Punctuation traps living language into still exhibits. Instead of breath, ferocity, moving wild, the sentence becomes an artifact, preserved, labeled, and is no longer alive. Punctuation curates thought, never perception. Punctuating writing organizes ideas like museum displays, categorized, framed, and separated from the moment. You never meet the living pulse of meaning. You tour the mind's archived interpretations. Punctuation protects the past from the present. Once punctuated, a line can never evolve. Once punctuated, a sentence or a line can never evolve. It becomes a relic of the moment it was written. The reader is never encountering now, they're encountering then, the past. Punctuation keeps language loyal to the past instead of letting it breathe into the present. Why unpunctuated writings illuminates the now, rising you out of the past, the museum of the past. Unpunctuated writing awakens the breath as authentic veracity. Without periods and commas, the breath becomes the only punctuation. Breath is always occurring now, so the writing pulls you out of memory and into immediacy. You're no longer reading the past, you're writing the present. Unpunctuated writing dissolves the mind's museum with no grammatical cages. The mind can never freeze a line into an artifact. It can never categorize, interpret, or archive the line. The writing stays alive, fluid, unstoried, and so do you. It lifts you out of the museum of what was and onto the field of what is now. Unpunctuated writing activates the rising you. The flow forces you to perceive instead of think, to feel instead of recall. It bypasses the identity built from memory and awakens the you that's forming a here and now experience. It never heals the past. It rises out of the past. Why viewpoints, opinions, and beliefs are museums from the past. Viewpoints freeze perception. A viewpoint is a fixed angle, a frame chosen long ago. The moment you adopt one, you stop seeing what actually is here and start seeing only what fits the frame. The viewpoint becomes a display case, and a perception becomes a tour of old angles. Opinions recycle memory. Opinions never rise from the now, they rise from stored experiences, conditioning, and inherited narratives. They're stitched from yesterday and yesterday's interpretations. When you speak an opinion, you're never expressing presence. You're echoing an archive. Beliefs are archive conclusions. A belief is a conclusion frozen in time. Once formed, it becomes a relic the mind protects, displays, and defends. Beliefs never evolve, they preserve what was yesterday. They keep you loyal to the past instead of available to the moment. Why ancestor survival mode programming, soul tattoos, emotional snapshots, third world enslaving mindsets are the museum from the past. Why our ancestral survival mode imprints stores ancient fear logic. These patterns are never about your life, they're about your lineage. Lineages of emergencies. They're archived reflexes, fossil reactions, old survival blueprints. Your nervous system still tours as if danger is current. Soul tattoos are emotional fossils. These deep imprints feel spiritual, but they're often unprocessed emotional snapshots from long gone moments. They act like sacred relics, but they're really a memory link from a version of you that no longer exists. Third world enslaving mindsets are inherited museum scripts. These mindsets aren't your authenticity, they're generational programming shaped by scarcity. Uh, Oppression and survival. They're never wisdom, they're exhibits. And the moment you stop touring them, they lose all authority within you. Why self help, personal growth, self improvement, therapy are museums of the past. They recycle old identities. These systems keep you studying the you, you used to be. They frame your wounds, patterns, and stories like artifacts behind the glass. Instead of dissolving identity, they preserve it. You don't evolve, you tour your own history. They teach you from archive frameworks. Self-help and therapy rely on models, theories, and interpretations created in someone else's past. You're handed maps drawn from yesterday's consciousness. You're not meeting your life. You're navigating someone else's old exhibit. They reinforce the fixture, broken loops, and improvement culture depends on the assumption that something is wrong with you. There's nothing ever wrong with anybody. They just had never discovered their explorer elegance. That assumption is a relic, a fossil, a museum piece. The moment you stop believing you need fixing, the entire museum collapses and you walk away free. Why forgiveness is a museum of the past. Forgiveness requires a villain and a wound. To forgive, you must reconstruct the past, the story, the hurt, the character who was wrong. Forgiveness keeps the wound on display like an artifact, it's an artifallacy, really, because it's really an image. It's an egotistical illusion. You can never forgive without reopening the exhibit. Forgiveness preserves the identity of the hurt. Forgiveness reinforces the role you played back then. It keeps you loyal to the version of you who was injured instead of dissolving identity. It curates it. You become the museum guide of your own suffering. Forgiveness recycles the emotional past. To forgive you must revisit the memory. Refeel the emotion and rerun the emotion. Reinterpret the event. It's emotional archaeology. You're never freeing yourself. You're touring the same relics again and again. It's emotional archaeology. You're never freeing yourself. You're touring the same relics again and again, calling it healing. Why appreciation illuminates the museum of forgiveness from the past. Appreciation dissolves the wound story. Forgiveness needs a wound to exist. Appreciation removes the wound entirely. When you appreciate the moment, the lesson, the growth, the clarity, the past injury loses its meaning. The museum lights shut off because there's nothing left to display. Appreciation upgrades perception from the hurt to insight. Forgiveness keeps you in the emotional archaeology of what happened. Appreciation lifts you up to the now, where the event becomes fuel, never trauma. You stop turning the relic and start receiving the revelation. Appreciation ends the victim villain architecture within you. Forgiveness still requires me who was hurt and then who did it. Appreciation dissolves both roles. It frees you from the identity that needed forgiveness in the first place. The entire museum collapses because the characters are no longer real. Why PhD programming is a museum of the past. PhD frameworks preserve outdated hierarchies. The entire structure is built on centuries-old academic case system. Title, citation, gatekeepers, committees, all relics. You're never learning reality. You're touring an institution with historical furniture. PhD knowledge recycles archive conclusions. A dissertation isn't a discovery, it's refinement of what someone else already declared. You're required to reference, repeat, and reinforce the past. Innovation becomes restoration. The museum stays open because you keep dusting its exhibits. PhD identity traps you in an inherited role: the scholar, the expert, the authority. These are costumes from old intellectual eras. You step into a character shaped by tradition, never by presence. The moment you wear the robe, you become part of the archive. Why social obedience is a museum from the past. Social obedience reenacts old survival scripts. Obedience is never modern, it's ancestral. It's the leftover reflex of tribes, empire systems that punished individuality. When you obey, you're never responding to now. Performing a survival mode. You're performing a survival pattern carved centuries ago. Social obedience preserves inherited identities. Obedience keeps you loyal to roles you never choose. The good child, the complaint worker, the agreeable citizen. These identities are museum mannequins, lifeless replicas of who you are and who you were trained to be, not who you are. Social obedience protects outdated authority structures. Every time you obey without perceiving, you reinforce the system built in the past: hierarchy and conformity and permission seeking. You keep the museum open by acting like its exhibits still matter. Why is comfort zone programming a museum of the past? Comfort zone code repeats old safety loops. Its comfort zone programming trains you to build inside familiar templates, predictable flows, and approved patterns. It's never creativity, it's replication. You're not coding the now, you're restoring the same old interface of who you used to be. Comfort zone logic preserves outdated identities. As you operate from comfort, you're running old identity built from past wins, past fears, past limitations. The code base is ancient. You're never updating yourself. You're maintaining a legacy system. Comfort zone habits block real-time perception. Comfort makes you follow pre-written scripts instead of perceiving what actually is here. It's autopilot. Museum mode, you're never responding to the moment. You're executing cached behavior from a version of you that no longer exists. Why am I the liberator of me destroys a museum, my museum of the past? Liberator identity ends archive identity. The moment you declare I'm the liberator, You stop being the character stored in the mind's museum. You're no longer the wounded one, the obedient one, the conditioned one. The liberator never tours exhibits. The liberator shuts the building down. Liberator awareness burns old narratives. The liberator never negotiates with memory. It doesn't restore old stories or polish old pain. It seems the past is expired data. That sight alone incarcerates the relics. The museum can never survive the presence of someone who perceives instead of who remembers. Liberator presence replaces past logic with here and now veracity. The liberator operates from perception, never programming. From now, never then. When you stand in that frequency, the past loses authority. Its police rolls wounds, scripts collapse because they can't command someone who is a sovereign authored in here and now authenticity. And see, that's if you can open up and look at the world as a museum, you can liberate yourself, because when you say museum, all the mind representations, they go quiet. Then you can investigate, instigate, and liberate yourself from yourself. All this stuff, a lot of this stuff is mind invented from your nervous system relics. So when you open up and understand and are aware, you rise out of it. Now you liberate you from you. And it really is about letting go of outside control and understand your whole life is mind invented of egotistical illusions. The whole outside world is an egotistical illusion. It's what you see it out here, it comes through the back here, and then it goes out. And whatever goes through here in the first representation, the mind encounters and the comfort zone, that's what goes out there. That's why it's really an egotistical illusion. And if you allow the outside world to be an egotistical illusion, you can question it right on the spot. You say, ask a simple question: is this an egotistical illusion? Why is this occurring to expand me? And where's the wisdom to rise me out of it? Anyway, I want to thank you, and may your night and life be as blessed as you're a blessing to me in the world.